All right, hello to all the IGNOU aspirants out there. If there's one topic that's pretty much guaranteed to pop up on your exams, it's this one, demographic transition. So in this explainer, we're going to break down the core theory and, maybe more importantly, get into why developing nations need a specific population policy. Stick with me, and by the end of this, you'll have the structure, the keywords, and even the memory hooks to build a top-scoring answer.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to build our case logically, step by step. First, we'll get the basics down, the DTM. Then we'll connect it to the huge dilemma facing developing countries. After that, we'll unpack a really useful framework for your answer, and we'll finish up with a super quick revision guide. Seriously, think of this as the perfect blueprint for your exam.
All right, first things first, let's tackle the demographic transition model itself. And we're going to jump right in with a classic exam question, one you should be totally ready for.
So how do you answer this one? Well, we're not just going to list a bunch of dry facts. No way. We're going to break it down into 3 super simple stages, and here's the best part. Each one comes with a memory hook that's going to stick in your brain right through the exam.
So, stage 1. Picture this, a pre-industrial world, mostly farming. The memory hook you have to remember for this is fierce fertility, fierce fatality. It just sounds dramatic, right? And that's because it perfectly captures the brutal reality of life back then.
So what does that actually mean? Well, on one hand, you have incredibly high birth rates. Think early marriages, no family planning. But on the other hand, you have tragically high death rates from poor sanitation, disease, you name it. And the result? They basically cancel each other out. So the population is either stable or grows really, really slowly.
Okay, let's move on to stage 2. And listen up, because this one is absolutely crucial for understanding the challenges that countries like India have faced. The memory hook is super simple, but so effective. Death drops, but deliveries don't.
Okay, so what's the big deal here? It's all about this massive gap that suddenly opens up. Think about it. Modern medicine, better food, all of a sudden, the death rate just plummets, right? Think about India right after independence, when public health programs really took off. But here's the catch. Social customs, the idea of having big families, that stuff doesn't change overnight. So the birth rate stays sky high. And what happens when deaths fall but births don't? Boom, you get a population explosion.
And that brings us, finally, to stage 3. This is where we see a modern, developed society. And the memory hook? Thin births, tiny mortality. It just sounds calmer, doesn't it? It gives you that sense of stability, of, well, population tranquility.
And yeah, this is a great way to see how it all ends up. As a country gets more developed, those high birth rates finally start to come down and match the already low death rates. The population stabilizes again, but, and this is a key point, it stabilizes at a much higher level than where it started back in stage 1.
Awesome. So, we've got the model down cold. Now we can use that knowledge to tackle the next big exam question, which flows right from what we've just learned. So, here's the question. Why can't developing nations just wait? Why can't they just let development happen and naturally bring the birth rate down, just like it did in the West? It's a great question, and the answer is complex, but don't worry, we've got a killer mnemonic to help you structure your answer perfectly.
If you want to write a really top-notch answer, you need a solid structure. And for this question, our secret weapon is the mnemonic DENPP. Yep, DENPP. It stands for Developing Economies Need Population Policy. Each letter is a key point, and now we're going to break them down, one by one.
Okay, let's start with D. D is for divergence. And this is all about one thing, explaining why the history of today's developing countries is completely different from what happened in Western Europe.
This slide really says it all, doesn't it? Look at the difference. In the West, death rates fell pretty gradually, over like 100 years. But in developing nations, imported medicine and technology made them crash almost overnight. The West started with fewer people and could send folks off to colonies. Developing countries? They were already crowded and had no relief valves. The bottom line is the population bomb hit them way harder and way earlier in their development.
All right, next step in DENPP is E for economic burdens. And we're talking massive burdens here. The phrase you got to remember is excess people eroded progress.
So here's the deal. A rapidly growing population really puts the brakes on an economy. I mean, it's simple, right? More people means more mouths to feed, which eats into national savings. It also means the government has to spend a ton of money just to stand still. We call this the investment effect. Let me show you what I mean.
Take a look at this. A huge slice of a country's investment, we're talking maybe 65% or even more, gets eaten up by what we call demographic investment. That's just building more schools, more hospitals, more houses, just to keep up with all the new people. That leaves way less money for productive investment. You know, the stuff like new factories and tech that actually makes a country richer.
Okay, now for the last two letters in our framework, N and P. These two really hammer home the point. They build the final case for why governments have to act and can't just sit back and wait.
This brings us to N, which stands for no, development alone is not enough. You've probably heard the phrase development is the best contraceptive. And you know what? It's true that prosperity leads to smaller families. But the problem is, it's slow. For countries stuck in a poverty trap, it's way too slow. It's that classic chicken and egg problem, right? Which comes first? Well, for these nations, they just can't afford to wait and find out.
And that leads us perfectly and logically to P. P stands for policy is a prerequisite. It's not just a good idea, it's not an option, it's an absolute necessity. This is the point where you argue that population policy becomes a totally legitimate, even essential tool for the government to break that cycle of poverty and kickstart development.
Okay, so if a policy is a must-have, what does a good one actually look like? What should it include? Well, our final P in DENPOP gives us the answer, the practical policy package.
A really smart policy isn't just one thing. It's a three-pronged attack. First, you've got direct stuff, like family planning programs. Second, and this is so important, you promote women's education and empowerment. Honestly, this is one of the single most powerful ways to lower fertility. And third, you've got to provide jobs. You have to turn that huge population from being a burden into a powerful asset.
All right, we did it. We've gone through the theory, the problem, and the solution. So let's wrap it all up with one final slide. This one is pure gold for your last-minute revision. Seriously, you might want to get your phone out and get ready to screenshot this.
And there you have it. The key really is to get the logical flow down. Start with the DTM theory, then use that DENP mnemonic to argue why a policy is needed, and finish by laying out that three-pronged policy package. If you can master that structure, you are well on your way to writing a fantastic, high-scoring answer. Good luck with your exams, and hey, drop a comment below and let us know what other big topic you want us to break down for you next.